Hello, welcome to part 2 of the AngularJS migration video. In part 1, we completed the scaffolding process and ended up with an Angular shell that wrapped the original AngularJS app. The benefit of such a dual boot system is twofold. First, we can use Angular CLI to manage the build and launching of the application. And second, we can do incremental migration so that the migrated components can still interact with the rest of the system. In this video, we'll show how the incremental migration works. Let's start with the migration summary page. This is where we can see the progress of the migration. We can tell that all the modules are already converted. This happened when we created the dual boot system. And we have yet to convert 2 components, 1 factory, 2 filters, and 2 routes. And we can also use this menu to navigate each category. So for factories, we have 1 phone service and 1 filter, 2 components. Notice that on the dependencies column, we listed phone as the dependency for both of these components. So let's first tackle the migration of the phone service. First, let's click on this phone item to look at the source code in VS Code. We can see that this is actually an ng resource that interacts with this bunch of JSON files. And what we need to do is simply clicking on this upgrade button. And in a few seconds, it changed to this refresh button where we can click to redo the migration, or we can simply click on the phone service item to look at the source code that got generated automatically. And we can tell that in the constructor we are injecting the HTTP service, which is also imported from Angular HTTP. And we set up 4 methods that corresponds to the CRUD methods of the resource. And what we need to do is to replace the service URL with the actual services. And in this get item, we can take advantage of the TypeScript template string. So we replace the phones with our placeholder. And we have no use of the delete and save service because the services are read-only. And notice that we at the bottom of the file we set up the AngularJS module and factory, so we can downgrade the converted phone service so that the Angular 1 components can still interact with this new Angular 4 service. Now, if we save this file, we notice that ngserve rebuilds the application, but if we switch to the Chrome, we see that we have a bunch of errors reported in the console. This is because we're now replacing the phone service using this downgraded injectable, but our ng4 service returns the promises, which is different from ng resource. So that means we need to fix the calling code. That is the phone list.component.js. Here we need to use handle the promise. And now ngserve rebuilds again, and we can see that the problem is fixed. Now, if we click on the phone detail, we see a similar problem, That's because the phone detail component also invokes the phone service. But instead of trying to locate where that phone detail component is, we can switch back to Angular Copilot. And on the components page, we can click on this item and quickly bring up the source code. And here, all we need to do is to fix the parameter of the get methods, which takes an ID, and we handle the return value of the promise, and we assign the phone to self.phone. With this simple fix, we go back to the Chrome, and indeed the phone detail page has been fixed. So this demonstrates the power of incremental migration. We incrementally migrated a phone service, but it's downgraded to NG1, so both the NG1 components can invoke it, even though we still have to make a small adjustment in the calling code. Now let's move on to convert the two components. First, we click on the upgrade button for the phone list, and in a few seconds, again, the button changed to a refresh button and the phone list component that we just converted. We can click on the plus sign to expand the panel so we can see the new files that we automatically generated, and also the modified module where we added the newly created phone list component. So now let's click on the phone list component to see the source code that we automatically generated. You can tell that we created the component decorator with a proper selector and template file. And then in the constructor, we injected the ng4 phone service, because in the previous phone list, we injected the phone service to the controller. And we also ported over the method implementation. Here we need to make some simple edits to make it work with the newly injected phone service. And we have two properties we need to add to the component by using the built-in Angular language service. And we need to import the phone data. So now the component is set up for ng4, and we also, at the end of the file, we downgraded the component and used it to replace the ng1's phone list component. And now all we need to do is we reformat the code and save, and ngserve compiles it just fine. But that's not all we needed to fix. We still have this component template file that we need to migrate. Now, the first thing I wanted to point out is that the content of the component template has been copied over automatically. But here we see that Angular language service was able to catch only this error, but it didn't recognize the other ng1 constructs like $control, ng-model, and ng-repeat. So these are the constructs that we need to migrate in order for ng4 to work. But if we have to do this manually, it will be very tedious. Luckily, there's an AngularDoc extension for VS Code. If you install this extension, you will notice that at the bottom left, there's an AngularDoc button. And clicking on this button, you'll be asked to sign in. You can use the same credential that you used for Angular Copilot. And once you do, in addition to this similar UI that we saw in the Angular Copilot, the AngularDoc extension implemented quick fixes to assist you in migrating these AngularJS constructs. So let's see how it does. So you can notice that we have a lot more error markers in this file. We flagged all these ng1 constructs like $control, like ng-repeat, and ng-model. So if you want to fix them one by one, you can select a specific fix item, or you can say fix all. For example, I can fix all the $controls, and all of them are deleted from the template. And I can fix all of these ng models. Notice they're replaced with the ng4 syntax. And for the ng-source, it's replaced with the square bracket. ng-repeat is replaced with ng4. And you'll notice that it's using the correct syntax for ng4. However, ng4 doesn't support filtering and ordering, so the functionality needs to be set up in your component. We added a getPhones method to do the internal filtering and ordering. So now let's switch to the component and add a getPhones method. And for the sake of time, I have prepared the method implementation. And it does the filtering and the sorting by implementing this all in the getPhones method. And now if I save it and coming back here, we can see that the entire functionality of the phone list actually is restored. And in fact, we have successfully migrated the phone list component and the template. Now let's go on to migrate the phone detail. So similarly, we click on the upgrade button and wait for a few seconds. Then we see that we have the phone detail component automatically generated, and we have it added to the phone detail module. You can click on the module file and look at the phone detail component being added to the decorations and entry components of the phone detail module. And if we look at the phone detail component, you'll notice that we set up the constructor to inject the route params and our phone list. This is because in the ng1 component, we had these two dependencies injected. So our Angular Copilot is smart enough to figure out what needs to be injected, and also the implementation within has been ported over to the constructor. So what's left for us to do is to do some edits to use the new injected parameters. For example, here I can use this dot route params, and I can delete the self references and change them to this. And I can use the quick fix to add phone to this page. We can also import phone data, and we add this main image URL to the component, and it's complaining that it doesn't recognize images. This is because in phone data we didn't have that. Okay, so that's looking good. One thing we did to this role param is this is a temporary utility class that help us do the ng1 role param injection into the ng4 component. Later on, we will replace this with the ng4's activity role. And again, we set up at the end of the file the ng1 downgrade, so that this component can be used to replace the phone detail component in AngularJS. Now let's format this file, save it, and it compiles fine, and we can move on to fix the template file. And in the template file, we have flagged a lot of these Angular 1 AngularJS constructs, but again, we can use these quick fixes to get through them all in very short time. For example, in the ng source, we can fix all, ng repeat, fix all. Same thing here. In fact, we're lazy. We can say fix all auto-fixable problems. So now we are left with this checkbox filter that we haven't really migrated. So now switch back to Angular Copilot and click on the filters page. And this is the checkmark filter we need to upgrade. And this is just trivial. We migrate the filter to ng4's pipe. And we click on this item to look at the source code. It's pretty trivial. But we need to do one thing, because this checkmark is declared in the call module, and our phone detail module needs to import the call module for phone detail page to use it. So here we are going to add the call module to the imports, and we can use this quick fix to add it easily. And now if we go back to if we go back to the template, the errors on the checkmark are removed, but we saw that we have a bunch of errors flagged for the phone properties because we didn't have them added to the phone data interface. But that's okay. If we go back to the page and we click on the phone detail, we can actually see that the phone detail page is working. Except that we have all these console errors reported, complaining about these undefined properties. This is because the phone reference may be undefined when the template is loaded. So what we need to do is put an ngIf around the entire template. So that should take care of the errors, and indeed it did. And we can also see that the check marks are working, and so the entire application is functional, and we successfully migrated both components and also that filter. So by now, if we look at the migration summary, we have actually completed all the component migrations. And what's left to do is, in the finishing up step, we need to remove the upgrade module from main.js and also all the AngularJS references. By that, I mean that for each component, we no longer need to downgrade the components to be used in AngularJS. And in main.ts, we used to bootstrap the AngularJS application use the upgrade module, and we no longer need that. So if we go to the Angular Copilot, we can click on these buttons to have them done automatically. So if we look at the main.ts, we actually didn't have the upgrade module imported, and there's no bootstrapping. And we go back to the second step, and it's going to go over all the components and remove those downgrade components and downgrade injectables. And indeed, if we look at the phone service.ts, for example, we're no longer doing this downgrading, and we commented out the Angular JS references. And the last step is to clean up the package.json. So we remove the AngularJS dependencies. Okay, to summarize, we used Angular Copilot to migrate the entire PhoneCat application within probably 20 minutes, but without all the explanations, it could be even faster. However, if we had a more substantial application, definitely it's going to take longer. But remember, the more complex your application is, the more help you need from an automated tool like Angular Copilot and the AngularDoc extension for VS Code. This is basically greatly improves your productivity and ensure that your application is migrated in a consistent and incremental way. Thank you for watching.